Hey, what's up? My name is John Bonjour. I'm a comic artist and film enthusiast. I have drawn some art. I am drawing some art today. I'm not enthusing about film. That's for my other videos on this channel. Point being, today we're talking about art and comic books, something that people generally speaking don't really cover when teaching people how to draw, how to lay out a comic book page. And here we are starting with just a basic blank page. I'm going to talk through just a couple of the really important basic rules before we get started on how to actually lay out your comic page. The most important rule in laying out a page is what we call the Z rule, which is essentially you need to know how a comic page is read. Now I'm treating this as American comics because there's lots of other kinds of comics that read a different way, but I'm familiar with American comics and that's what I'm teaching you. Essentially, each comic page is read in this exact format. So, a big Z. So you'll start here at the top left, and then you'll read these panels, and then once you get here, you hop immediately down to the next left here in the middle, and then that could be the rest of the page, but if it's not, then you'll hop over to this side, down to the last series of panels, again, on and on if there's more than that, and then to the end of the page. And that's just how the eye naturally reads a comic page. It's also, fun fact, how the eye naturally looks over just a general page of art or piece of art if it's not given a direct focal point to focus on. So most of the time, if you're starting to look at art, you'll notice you start in the top left and then you travel, and then let's say there's, a big face here going like, what's going on? You'll start here and then almost immediately jump here, and then you kind of bounce around after that. This is art right here. So that's the Z rule. Another basic rule is just consider the number of panels that you're including. This is more of a writing rule than it is a drawing rule, but it's also important in terms of drawing. And if you're the writer and the artist, then it's definitely something you need to know. There should not be more than 9 panels on a page almost ever, and 9 is massively pushing it, especially if you want this page to be dynamic and action heavy. 9 panels is for a conversation page where there's a lot of pauses and moments where you have, say, a panel here where somebody's going to be saying something, and then a short panel of just a response, just a look, and then another panel here. Then you can do 3 rows of those kinds of panels and you'll get to 9. But generally speaking, you don't want to have 9 panels on a page because that's a lot of panels. And I know that makes the writing process a lot harder because it seems like there's a lot of panels and you have a certain number of pages, and there is something to be said for that. But think about this. If you have a page with, let's say, 15 panels, okay? I'm gonna just try to wing it and see if I can do what I would normally do. We'll say if you're gonna do a really tight page, we'll do that. And then let's say there's a long action here, so I'll do just a real small panel there. We're at 4 out of 15 again. So then you get to 5. And then let's say, because I don't want to repeat this exact same row, I'm going to say we do another long one here. That's 6 out of, again, 15 that we're trying to get on here. Let's do 7, real tall, skinny, 8, another real tall, skinny. These you can do almost nothing with. Not to say that there's not the possibility of using a panel like this, but these sorts of panels are going to be for very specific purposes. Those kinds of things are tiny shots, like, say, if we're talking about my comic, Edge of Border Town, if I wanted to just do a shot of a dice, just to give strong emphasis of a little dice right there. Sure, that kind of panel works for that. But you're not going to have, let's say, you're not going to have a panel where somebody is throwing a punch in something like this. If anything, you might do like a punch connecting. This is going to be a terrible hand. Get ready. You might do like a hand. That might be your panel for something like that. But it's certainly not going to be a guy who's throwing a punch and then a guy reacting to the punch, because that's a tiny panel. You're never going to get enough detail or enough contact. It's just not going to be enough to convey what you're trying to show. Even if you can show that, think about that in comparison to this page. This has no weight, where if you use that as, a quarter of the page, that would have way more weight. Anyway, point being, we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels here, and we're trying to get to 15, so we've got a long way to go. If you're doing the math in your head, that's, I think, 7, but I could be wrong, left to do. So there's 9 and 10, and this is too many panels already for a page, and we're still trying to get more. You get the point that I'm making. I'm gonna finish it out real quick. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, getting tight. 5. There we go. All right. This is too many panels for a page. There is no question about that. And I harp on this because I've gotten scripts with 15 panels in a page. I'm not saying it's impossible for this to work, but it is such a specific scenario that it's just better to stick to the no more than 9 panels per page. Another basic rule, and I kind of touched on this before, the general emphasis of a page, something that you want to emphasize, needs to be bigger and louder and have the eye directed to it. So let's say you were doing a fight scene, and we can talk more in depth about how you might lay out a fight scene, we will in a bit, but let's say you're doing a fight scene, you have maybe a standoff, if you want to have like an angry face here, looks like a real fighting guy, and then let's say you want to show from maybe the other perspective, or from this perspective, we'll just do this guy's perspective. Give him spiky hair so that we know who's who from this perspective. And then we see way down here a guy with, I don't know, we'll call him Dr. America. And he's getting ready. So that's how you would start that. Neither of these panels really have that much emphasis, but if you take a second and make the rest of the page this right here and have this weird lizard man and Dr. America, I'm sticking with it, then this all of a sudden has way more emphasis. There's a lot more weight given to this panel. I don't even know if you can tell what it is that I'm thumbnailing, but we're just vibing with it. All of a sudden, this has so much more emphasis right here than either of these panels do. And that's important. That's something you need to weigh. The more space you give your panels, the more emphasis they have, which is a good and bad thing. I've seen a lot of comics that way overemphasize completely the wrong things. And by seen, I mean I have made a lot of comics that way overemphasize completely the wrong things. These are all mistakes that you're probably going to make at one time or another. Probably mistakes I've made in current comics that I'm doing. Again, Edge of Bordertown, johnbonart.com. But it's something to consider. As you're making comics, it's okay to make mistakes, but know the rules that you're breaking. That's important. Another general rule is the reading pace. So as you have, let's say, a really long panel here, and then 1, 2, 3 panels here. This long panel, let's say it's like an establishing shot, or who knows, it could be anything. It could be a face, whatever it is. That long panel is gonna be read a little bit slower than 1, 2, 3. Those are a little bit more like staccato if you do music. Those are short, fast, punchy panels, where this is supposed to be a longer, maybe you'd have some text in that panel. Who knows what that could be? But if you want them to linger on that panel a little bit longer, that's how you do it. You make sure that the panel is a little bit bigger, takes up a little more space so that the eye takes a little longer to get through it. That said, there's another thing to consider in terms of reading pace, which is the longer you spend on an action or a thing or setting up imagery, the longer it takes for the reader to physically read it. Let's say in a movie you'd have an establishing shot, and that establishing shot would just be rolling hills. That's what we're gonna go with. In the comic, if you have an establishing shot of rolling hills, you can't control how long the reader stays on this, because that's just how their eyes are gonna go. Even if you put a bunch of dialogue in here, then you're gonna start to cover it up and you lose your establishing shot. What you can control is, let's say you really wanna settle into the scene. Just having one image doesn't do that, but let's say you do rolling hills and then a small bird that's gonna look terrible. Yeah, there we go. Do a small bird, setting a little bit of the tranquil scene there, and then another one here, showing a, who knows, a leaf. The point that I'm making is the more panels you do focusing on whatever moment in the comic it is, the longer the reader will have to read that. Perfect example of this is Hellboy. Mike Mignola is a master of comics creation, and he very quickly figured out that if you stay on, let's say, a graveyard and keep showing different sides and angles and moments and little snapshots of the graveyard, the longer the reader will settle into that scene and will spend more time getting into the pace of the book. It's one of those things most people don't really think about because you think I just gotta get the page out and get it out as quick as I can, but it's such an important, beautiful little thing that gives you so much more control as an artist and a writer. Now, my last basic rule that's really important to remember is to keep your gutters A, consistent, and B, important. So, gutters, if you have 2 panels, these are terrible panels, This right here is going to be your gutter, the space between panels. That's where time happens. That's where there's a pause. It takes a second for the reader to jump from panel 1 to panel 2. That's a huge part of how you set your pacing in between panels. So if you're reading and your gutters are really thin, it's going to read a lot quicker because you jump immediately from 1 to 2. But if you do, I'm just going to leave it how it is, how it was, that's a much longer jump, and that generally emphasizes that there's a little bit more time between 1 and 2. So if you're doing a fight scene, you'd probably want to have them a little bit closer, a little bit tighter. Obviously there's exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, the less time in between each panel, the smaller the gap you want to make. That said, make sure you keep these consistent. Throughout your book, you don't want to have a bunch of pages that just have random, let's do like this, and then a pretty big gap here between those, and then having this one right here be really tight, and then bigger gap again. That is a horrible looking page for a lot of reasons. One, just general artistry, but two, because these gaps, these gutters, are not at all consistent between the page. You'd read it really quickly, 1, 2, and then you take a second to get to 3, and then you read through 3, and then 4, and then 5, 6. It doesn't play well, and that paneling is really frustrating. You want to make sure that your gutters are consistent, and you also want to make sure that you leave enough room on your outer gutters out here, so enough space between your panels and the border of the page. For printing reasons, because it's a nightmare, honestly. To figure that out, it sucks so bad. Do yourself a favor and leave the correct amount of space between those two, because it's a horrible thing to figure out. But B, and I would say even more importantly, you want to make sure that you're padding your page with enough distance between the edge of the page and the book that you're really getting your scene collected into this one space. You're setting your reader's eyes to be in this area, making sure that you know that their story is going to be right here. You never have to leave these boundaries. That's a good point, Drawing John. This is Recording John. Just taking a second for a word from our sponsors. Me. I'm the sponsor again. Guess what? I'm not big enough to have sponsors, but I will sponsor myself and tell you to please check out Edge of Border Town on my website, johnbonart.com. It is a free comic book. It will always be free to read. And I'm putting out chapter 4 next week or right now, depending on when you're watching this. I'm starting to put out new pages every week, every Tuesday, Border Town Tuesdays. If you want to get those pages a week early, you can go on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/johnbonjour. And you'll get a whole bunch of other stuff. I do monthly art. I do a blog. It's a great time. So go check those out, and let's get back to Drawing John. Now here we have a page that I've laid out a little bit of the outer gutter, the borders of the page, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit more in-depth laying out a comic book page. We're going to talk through, I'm going to create just one page, a fake scene for a fake comic that I think would be really fun and makes me laugh. But before that, one quick thing to think about. So if you're not just doing the standard 1, 2, let's say 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, right? If you're not using that layout, and instead you're trying to do, who knows, it could be anything. It could be one big one here, and then another big one here, and then having them, I don't know, like almost spiral out like that, which is pretty sick, pretty cool. I might use that for something. But if you want to do that, consider your readability. So if you do have that, don't put your main action at the bottom of this one here and then up at the top here, because thinking about that Z rule, it's not going to start here. If your main action's down here, you won't catch what's going on. So you're just going to start up here, see nothing, and then your brain's going to go, oh, should I go there or maybe here because we've got an action coming here, so maybe that is where I'm supposed to start, or does it start here? And then let's say you have your action down here, but it's a little too close, so then it's like, do I bounce here, go here, and then here? Or do I go here, bounce down to here, and then here? How does that work? The point is, it's easy to mess up readability if you're not going within the standard deviation of how panels are normally laid out. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it is something to think about. A more common occurrence might be, let's say, if you have this and this here, but then you have this and this. Now the reader has a problem, because normally if you just take from here up, right, you've got this panel, which you would read down like this, and then you go to the left, down like that. That would make sense, except once you do that, you go here, down, down, and then do you jump here or do you jump here? We don't know. The reader isn't sure what to do. So depending on how you lay it out, and I've seen this done in professional comic books, the way you've laid it out, the reader might go here and here, or the reader might go here, or the reader might go like that, which is horrible. It's no good. The other option is possibly that the reader might jump like that, but it's very unlikely. But I've seen comic pages laid out like this that are almost unreadable, especially when this interacts with this in a very specific way. It makes it impossible to read because you don't know which comes first. Again, a thing I've seen in a real comic book made by professional adults. While you're making your comics, you can also consider maybe not doing the traditional borders. So normally a border would just be straight lines all across, right? It would just be your standard normal line. But let's say you wanted to give your comic a little bit more of a homegrown feel. You can do something that has a little bit of a natural edge to it. That gives a very different feel. I've seen lots of professional comic books that do a really wonderful job having hand-drawn like this with those kind of weird wrinkles and deviations. You can also, who knows, you could do airbrush. That would be kind of stupid, but you could do airbrush if you really wanted to. You could do soft edges like that. You could come in and do, if you wanted to have like a real weird chunky edge, you could have that. Like, there's a lot of options that you can do that give completely different feelings to your comic. So play around with what kind of panel borders. It's these little details that make a difference in a comic. For example, for my comic, I chose to go for these standard flat lines because I want the art to be the thing that feels unnatural in a normal world. I don't want it to feel like the comic is old or creative or built in a different way. I want it to feel standard and the art inside it is strange. Just a choice I made, not the right choice necessarily, but the choice I made. All right, let's lay out our fake comic book page. I'm gonna do half dialogue discussion and half down here, action and exciting moments, just so that we get a feel for how each one might be handled. So for our dialogue, I'm just gonna do 3 different panels. So we're gonna go one here, and obviously this would all be determined by what the script says or how you wrote it. In this case, we haven't really written anything, so, you know, there's only so much I can really ask for. I am gonna do a real thin panel just to show you what that might look like, and because I think it'd be fun. And then we're gonna come here, keeping those gutters consistent again. You also generally wanna keep the height of your panels the same, so in this case, I did not do a great job of that. That's okay. We're just gonna come in and fix it real quick. Perfect. All right, and then we're gonna have a moment here, which is going to be kind of a pause, heightened dramatic moment. And then I have a fun plan for another thing I want to show you guys here. So we're just going to do this. And this. Actually, you know what we're gonna do, shaking it up a little bit, we're going to angle that a little bit so that it has a little more direction. And this is all stuff you can think about throughout your creation process. If you add an angle, it adds a motion, it adds a direction. You wanna make sure that your angle is gonna be used well by the page you're creating, so I have an idea for how I can use it. It's not just a random angle. Although, again, a thing I've seen probably, I would argue, end up being random angles in comic pages that you gotta have to work with. All right, there is our basic comic layout. Obviously, this is all pretty bare bones, so you would go in and maybe redo them. This is all gonna be for our sketch layer. Eventually, I hope to go on and finish this page by doing another video on how to sketch comics, how to ink comics, and then color and, you know, lettering and so on. So, for now, this is how we have our layout. I'm just gonna sketch in a couple little very, very simple thumbnail designs because I wanna give you guys an idea for what I'm thinking here and talk through a couple of quick things. Most importantly being, right here, we're gonna have our main character, who is a frog. He's gonna be sitting at a bar, because why not? Drinking a little juice, a little adult juice for adults. Love it. And then in the foreground here, we're gonna have a guy, just a random guy. No, I'm not doing the full sketch here. I'm just getting the general concept for what I'm looking for. Like I said, I hope to do a sketching page later. And we've planning our sketch here. We know we're gonna have some dialogue up here. And then I'm gonna do a reaction shot, exactly what I was talking about. Little frog reaction shot. This is based on a drawing that I did at church of a character that I call Boxer Frog. So we're just gonna, you know, some ideas are winners, and I think this is one of them because he is wonderful. Boxer Frog. And then so it's gonna be saying something here. Then we're gonna have perhaps a what did you just say? And then we're gonna return to our guy, see our other guy head on, just so that we set the scene for who these characters are. I've got to speed this up. So he's going to be repeating whatever nonsense he said. Let's make him more bikery. That seems fun. I'm just going to make that a little smaller so that he can say whatever it was that he was saying. Maybe an I said whatever. Plan that out. And this, I think, is always a classic. You get your head on, face on, getting ready for a standoff kind of moment. So you got that tension between the two. Who knows what kind of tension it is? Could be any kind of tension. Gross. And then here, this was my original thought. I want to have... Oh, I forgot to give him... He's got big old gloves, because I think that's fun. Also, my window is open, and a helicopter has decided to land. So, what an exciting life I lead. Anyway, so this is what I was thinking for this panel. I want to talk to you guys about how to break a comic book panel. So how to send an image outside of the panel in a way that actually works, because that's extremely hard to do, and important because it's probably going to be asked of you as a comic artist. The thing to keep in mind, the most important thing that I can possibly tell you about breaking a comic book panel, is make sure that where you're breaking it fits with the action and it fits with reading the story. So in this case, we're going to have him doing a big old punch, and then we're going to break the panel with our guy here. He's going to be flying out of the panel. This adds a heightened drama and motion to the pages. There's a lot of really fun things that you can create by breaking the panels. You just have to know how to do it. And here's why I say that. If this, let's say, were reversed, we'll just flip it right here. All of a sudden, you're breaking out of the panel, you read 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you read off to the edge there. If the motion sends it away from where the next panel should be, it doesn't work. You won't read it well. Where this reads 1, 2, 3, and then here, whatever we have here. So in this case, again, this is a very loose panel. I'm gonna have this guy flying backward, crashing into a jukebox. That seems fun. Again, this part doesn't really matter because it's all going to be in the sketching phase that we do most of this, but enough to get me to remember what's happening. I can still hear that freaking helicopter. But we're going to have that, and then maybe here we'll have, just because he's a fun character, we'll have his weird bulbous eyes. All right, there you go. That is our comic book page. That's how you generally lay out a page, and I've got a couple other random notes that I'm going to run through really, really quick. If you're writing, make sure you write an establishing shot. If you're the artist, make sure that you draw an establishing shot. So that's just any shot. Obviously, in this case, we would have had that establishing shot on an earlier page, but any shot that shows the setting, wherever they are. When you change scenes, you want to make sure that you make it clear that you've changed scenes, that you're in a different place. That freaking helicopter is the loudest thing. But you want to make sure that you're setting a solid establishing shot so that you know where your action is taking place, where your scene is taking place. Additionally, I showed you here, make sure that you remember where your dialogue is going to be, generally speaking, when laying out a panel, because the last thing you'd want to do is, let's say, draw this panel beautifully, a little bit too big, and then your dialogue has to cover the frog, or the action, or the character. It always looks bad when dialogue covers the art in a page, and it's an easy mistake to avoid and to make. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're going through it. One last thing, in terms of paneling, make sure you shake it up a whole ton or not at all. All of your panels should look different like this, or it should be one consistent grid and just keep it that way the whole time. I've seen both work beautifully, but if you do grid the entire time and then completely shake it up for 2 pages out of the book, very often that's not gonna work super well. It could work, obviously there's examples, but again, I'm talking basic rules here. Also consider your background color. A lot of people want to put black behind their panels. It can work. There's a lot to be said if you're doing a dark, creepy story for having that tone. But generally speaking, I really highly recommend not leaning into that. A, because it's a lot of ink, so a printer might not want to do it. And B, because I don't think it looks as good, generally speaking. It can work really well if you're planning it out with a lot of blacks in your inks, like a Mike Mignola. But if you don't have that, then it adds a busyness to the pages that's just unnecessary. In the same way, consider these pages as a piece of graphic design. It should all, yes, look good individual panels, but as a page, it should flow well. It should feel fun to read. It should be a simple, solid, readable story that's entertaining and gets across emotion and what you're trying to convey. So consider each panel a piece of art, but also the page itself is a piece of art. The paneling matters, the pace matters, the layout matters, every little detail is important. And there you have it, how to lay out a comic book page. I really hope that helped. Let me know in the comments below if you have any follow-up questions about any of the rules that I presented and any of the things that I introduced in this video. I look forward to making more comic book creation content because I am just radically passionate about comic books. Thank you so much for watching this video and checking out my channel. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on comic book creation, movies, TV shows, just comic books in general, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and comment down below which you'd like me to talk about next, or do none of those things because I am not your dad. Now here we have a page that I've laid out a little bit of the gutter, the outside rim. That sounds gross.